Coming up, I'll be speaking with Cy Kosell, Natural Resources Manager for the City of St. Paul. That's next on the St. Paul Forum. Welcome to the St. Paul Forum. I'm interim host John Forde. Along with Lisa Tabor, I'll be alternating as a guest host during the next year, while regular host Mike Wassenaar is on sabbatical. With me today is Cy Kosell, Manager of Natural Resources for the City of St. Paul. Welcome, Cy.
Hi, John.
Tape's rolling. How'd you get such an awesome gig? How'd you get here?
Working for the City of St. Paul for quite a while time. My background is pretty extensive in Parks and Recreation, and I've been, this is my 33rd year.
Wow. You look like a young man.
Thank you. Thank you.
Did you grow up in St. Paul? How did you?
I did. I grew up on the west side of St. Paul, over near Baker Playground on the west side of St. Paul. So I'm a longtime resident of the city.
And started work in the Parks Department?
Actually started when I was 20 years old.
Uh-huh.
So, and things have just worked out over the years. It's been a great place to work, and just kind of risen through the ranks.
Good, okay. And now you're in charge of all kinds of stuff. You've got the Manager of Natural Resources. Sounds like the world is your domain. I mean, you've got trees, you have, what else is in your domain?
The Natural Resources section is just a part of the operations division for Parks and Recreation, and it encompasses our forestry division, and also our environmental services and what we call our art and gardening unit.
Okay. The trees, let's talk about that, because emerald ash borer is such a big topic on so many people's minds. How is it progressing? It's just started, but we're terrified. How should we be feeling about this?
Emerald ash borer is really at the early stages. As probably most people know, we found it less than a year ago in May, and we found it earlier than most cities normally find it. Usually it takes about 4 to 6 years before someone will find it in their city. We estimate that it was probably brought here in about 2006, and so we found it at the very early stages, but the outlook for our ash trees is not very good. Typically, we've been told by other communities around the nation who have emerald ash borer that once it starts to build in population, that our ash trees could be gone anywhere from 10 to 15 years if they're left untreated.
Okay. Is there any, what does the treatment mean? Can it be arrested? I mean, people have such a strong memory of Dutch elm disease. How are the two parallel?
Dutch elm kind of bounces around a little bit. Not every tree necessarily gets Dutch elm, and if a tree is unhealthy, it might be susceptible to the Dutch elm disease, whereas emerald ash borer is not really a disease. It's an infestation by an exotic invasive beetle, and it doesn't discriminate. It goes after every ash tree, whether they're young or they're old or healthy or not healthy. So once it's in an area, and they feed, the adult beetles emerge in about June, and they feed on the different canopies of the trees, and they'll just keep moving. They move probably about, on their own, they typically move about a mile a year. And so there is no ash tree that's off limits for the emerald ash borer.
And how do you fight it? Are there pesticides you can use, or just kind of eradication of the trees that are infested?
There is no natural control or predator for emerald ash borer in our country, in North America. And the only thing that you can do to save your ash tree is to use a pesticide. There are some pesticides on the market that are advertised to be effective against it. However, for the life of the tree, you have to treat the tree for the life of the tree. So if the product is good for 6 months, you might have to do it twice a year. Then there's other products that are advertised to be good for 2 or 3 years, much more expensive, but every 2 or 3 years you would have to apply that product. Okay. In St. Paul, one of our concerns is, some areas of the country are into a widespread pesticide program. In St. Paul, We're not quite certain that we want to apply that many pesticides to our environment, so we're actually taking more of an active role to replant, reforest trees as they die.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. When the Dutch elms went, there was a big move to ash, and so it's kind of from the predecessor to somewhat of a monoculture. In retrospect, was that heterogeneous enough? Was there enough of a mix, or did we go too strongly with the ash?
I think now we all look back and say we went too much with ash trees. At the time, as I understand, because that's before my day, but 30 years ago or so, even 40 years ago, the ash tree seemed to have just all the perfect makeup for an urban tree. And so it really was probably overplanted. And so we estimate that probably 25 to 30% of the trees in St. Paul are ash trees. And so we're going to take a real large hit when emerald ash borer spreads to the city.
And so the replanting now would be more of a mix?
Correct. We're trying to definitely diversify when we do replant.
Okay, and what's strong in that? Tell us some of the brands. Tell us.
Well, we get a lot of people that tell us, well, let's go with native trees that are native to Minnesota. So that's something that we would like to do, and we will where it makes sense. However, we're also finding that a lot of times native trees don't grow well on an urban boulevard in the city. For instance, we've tried oaks, and an oak tree growing on a city boulevard with compacted soils and salt and traffic doesn't necessarily grow well like it would in a natural environment like an oak savanna. So as much as we want to incorporate native trees, we can't do strictly native trees. So we're using whatever trees that we can grow that will do well, and that could include lindens. There's still some maples out there. There's a new hybrid elm trees that are disease resistant, not necessarily foolproof, but they're showing that they're somewhat resistant to Dutch elm disease. And so we're trying to change and try to diversify not only the number of types of trees, but also to not have 6 blocks of the same type of tree. We're trying to incorporate more diversity and maybe sequence different trees.
I imagine you get some residents a little in your face sometime, a little bit passionate about this?
Absolutely.
Okay.
People love trees.
And to what extent is it even political in that if you find a species of tree that's going to work really well, but takes too long to grow because they want their trees now?
Yeah, that's interesting. Everyone loves trees, and what we're actually finding out is that sometimes the smaller trees actually grow as fast as putting in a larger tree. In the past, we typically have tried to plant like a bald and burlap 2.5-inch tree that's maybe already 8 to 9 feet tall and looks good, but it takes longer for that tree to adapt to the soils. When it's removed from the nursery, some of the root structure's already been cut off, and it takes longer for it to adapt. Whereas if you can actually plant a bare root tree that maybe is a little younger, but it has all the roots intact, that actually will grow faster and adapt to the soils better. So it's a little, doesn't feel natural, but young trees will actually sometimes adapt better and grow just as fast as a larger tree that you might put in.
Now, there must be almost an aspect of public health too, because of the communicable nature of so many things that affect trees. You've got the city trees, which the city owns and has to manage and trim and take down sometimes. But then there are also the privately owned trees. And how much purview do you have over them?
That's a good question. Private trees, the only thing that we deal with on private trees are looking for diseases that are in our ordinances. For instance, we have an ordinance that allows us to go and inspect for Dutch elm disease. And we recently just passed an ordinance for us to be able to go inspect property for emerald ash borer. But other than those diseases, the only other thing that we really can go on property and inspect for would be for hazard trees that might affect a neighboring property or the health or safety of someone individual. Interestingly enough, if it doesn't affect a neighboring property or the public right away, we actually don't have the authority to go in and take out a hazard tree if it's going to fall on someone's own property or their own house.
And now you're describing situations where you can go in by law, you're entitled to. But are there situations in which the public calls and essentially they're looking for a vendor, but they think, I'll go with the city. Can the city come out and give me a diagnosis or things like that? Is that a service the city provides?
Yes, it is. We have arborists that work on staff, and a lot of people don't realize that if you have a question about a tree, we will certainly come out and look at your tree and try to assist you in telling you what we think is wrong or give you advice on the tree.
Okay, good. And you were talking a little bit before about analysis of the canopy in the city itself. How, tell us some of the benefits of the canopy and what this analysis might tell us.
We're interested in actually doing a measurement of our canopy. We're actually applying for a grant through the DNR, and we're hopeful that we'll get it. And the idea is that through some aerial imagery, that they'll be able to basically do a flyover of the city, and they'll take snapshots of the city, and they can study that imagery and tell us what the total coverage of the city is as far as canopy. And that'll tell us where we have voids in the city and where we actually need to plant more trees. And the reason that's important is because trees provide a number of benefits, whether it's the cooling effect of trees, or cleaning air, wind breaks, carbon sequestration, the stormwater runoff benefits. Trees have endless benefits. There's even social benefits where there's a lot of evidence that trees provide calming and just better community overall. So,
okay. Tell us about the department itself. How many employees are there?
In our forestry section,
Sure.
In our forestry section, we have about 36 employees at this time, which is actually a fairly small group for the number of trees we maintain.
That's an even better question. How many trees do we maintain? Is there a count?
Well, we don't have an absolutely perfect inventory of our trees, but we have estimates. We believe in St. Paul, a city of our size, we probably have about 1 million trees when you consider the public and private. About half of those we figure are public trees, and not only on boulevards, but we have parks and we have open spaces like along the river and the bluffs that line the Mississippi River. So we have a lot of open space with a lot of trees.
And you've done some collaborative work with the Minnesota Department of Agriculture.
Yeah, on emerald ash borer, specifically, when the infestation hit, the Minnesota Department of Agriculture is kind of responsible for looking out for pests and disease that enter our state. And so they've been extremely actively involved, and we've been partnering as close as we can on this response to emerald ash borer with them.
Tell us about a little bit about Arbor Month. It's coming up, and it's going to be festive, and what will go on during Arbor Month?
Arbor Month is a great time for people who love trees and who want to plant trees to get out and experience the beauty and the wonder of trees. And we have a number of events that we're trying to get people out and take advantage of that and learn more about trees. Just a few of them. We're actually going to have 3 events specifically around Arbor Day this year. One, we have a volunteer planting in Como Park where we're going to be planting about 100 trees that we're looking for volunteers for. That's on May 1st. Every year we work some elementary schools who are interested, and we do educational programs for some 3rd grade classes, and we have a poster contest. And then the winning school, wherever the poster came from, will actually plant a tree on their property. And the 3rd event that this year we're working on is what we call a Festival of Trees. It's going to be at Newell Park on May 15th, and we're trying to arrange to have some different events that will include education. We're planning to have volunteers that we need to plant about 30 trees, and then we're also having with the tree climbing championship that's going to take place at Newell Park. And that actually is both on Saturday, and then the championship is actually on Sunday.
Now, is that videotaped? That sounds really fun to watch.
I believe there is some video of that out there that people can get a hold of, but that could definitely be provided.
How do they pick the tree for the climbing championship?
Actually, it's done by the Minnesota Society of Arboriculture, and they come in and they actually have a number of events that use different trees. So they have trees where they maybe go up and do like aerial rescue, and then they have trees where they just fastest climb, and they have a number of events. So they use probably a good half a dozen trees for different events.
Oh, that sounds really interesting.
It is. It's very interesting.
Now, there are 2 other major domains that you look out for. One is art and gardening, and the other is environmental services.
That's correct.
Can you tell us a little bit about environmental services? The city must provide quite a bit of an analysis and actual, I guess, work is the word I'm looking for.
Our environmental services section does a couple things. Number one, as a department, we're responsible to handle any regulations or things that might come up that we deal with, whether it's dealing with water or handling solid waste and a number of different issues. We have wells in the city that we monitor, for instance, on golf courses and other places. So we do a lot of that kind of regulatory things that we have to comply with. But probably more interestingly enough, we do a lot of natural resources work, which includes prairie restorations, shoreline restorations. If people are familiar with Como or Phelan Lake and have walked around, they've noticed how we've taken shorelines that in the past might have had riprap and were eroding, and we've transformed those, in some cases with the help of partners like watershed districts, and we've transformed them into native shoreline plantings and bluff restorations. So we have, and a lot of those programs and work require the use of volunteers. So we're always looking for people who are interested in helping out in those projects.
Okay. In case you're just joining us, I'm talking to Cy Kosell, Manager for the City of St. Paul of Natural Resources. We've been talking about trees, and now we're talking a little bit about environmental services the city provides. That was really interesting. Keep going on that. That was really good.
Okay. The environmental services, a lot of people probably don't realize it. As I said, it's probably our largest user of volunteers. And some of the events we have coming up on April 10th, we have our 24th annual Spring Parks Cleanup that we have people come out. It's a Saturday morning, and people come out. We have a kickoff celebration at 4 different locations around the city, and we give out an award for like some volunteers of the year type of thing, and have some refreshments, and then people go out and clean up their parks. And we've been doing this for 24 years now, and have done a really good job cleaning up the parks with tons of trash. I mentioned before on May 1st we're having the Como Park tree planting event we're looking for volunteers for. And we have a number of events such as cleanups, removing invasive species such as buckthorn and garlic mustard. For instance, Lilydale Park, which we're trying to transform here in the next, we're basically taking it from an undeveloped park to it's going to be a very nice park in the next few years, and that we're starting that process by using volunteers to help clean it up. We have a project in Mounds Park that we're actually on phase 2 of, where we're removing a lot of the buckthorn and other invasive species and actually using that biomass that's going to be used for powering up a district energy plant in St. Paul, and we need volunteers for that. We also employ a lot of youth every summer. They're called a program called the Youth Job Corps program, and not only do we use those youth in these environmental services projects, but we also put them through what's called an Eco Ranger Academy, where they actually learn and go through a curriculum that's been laid out for them, and they get a certificate, and they graduate from that program and move on from there, and hopefully, maybe become our future stewards of the future. So those are a few of the things that we do.
How much of your work is actually educational? Is that largely the program you're just describing? Is that largely the sum of the education?
We try to, in all of our volunteer events, we usually try to do some education. When people arrive for an event, we usually try to explain the benefits of what they're doing and why they're doing it. And so whether you're an adult that just wants to come out and learn, we try to send you away that you did learn something. But in the case of like our youth and in our programs for the Youth Job Corps, that is actually a strong part of our program.
Okay. Let's talk a little bit about the art and gardening program. How big is that? How does that work?
It's, again, like environmental services, these programs are actually small in the number of employees, but again, they use a lot of volunteers and a lot of community help. And the art and gardening program is basically kind of a beautification for all the outlying parks in the city. And they, for example, we hang up about 568 hanging baskets around the downtown and other areas of the city. A lot of them, we get donations from the community or the business community that want to help purchase these baskets, and we get them. We grow about 120 of them now ourselves, and the rest we contract out. And then we hang these baskets up around June 1st, and they stay for the entire summer, and we maintain them on a regular basis, watering them daily and making sure that they're fertilized and flowering. That's the hanging baskets. We also take care of flower beds and urns around the city. Some of the parkways downtown, like we have a Kellogg Boulevard that's been replanted over the years. And we use Youth Job Corps members, about over 30 Youth Job Corps to help us in the summer to maintain these areas. And they actually go through a similar curriculum, what we call the Horticultural Academy, where they also not only are working, but they're learning about what they're doing, and then they get a certificate if they pass the curriculum.
Now, as we tape this, the floods are just going to peak in the next day or two here, so it's really completely the wrong time to make a prediction. But tell us a little bit about how the floods affect your work.
In the city of St. Paul, there's quite a bit of shoreline that's actually parkland. We have Crosby, we have Hidden Falls, we have Lilydale, we have Harriet Island. We actually have property in Pig's Eye. And other than some of the industrial land along the river, probably the majority of land in St. Paul is actually designated as parkland. So we end up having to close a lot of the parks. Hidden Falls and Crosby, they get closed because of high water. A park like Harriet Island, we actually try to do a little bit more protection by putting up some Jersey barriers to deflect any debris that might come along. It requires shutting down facilities. Tradespeople have to go in and they have to shut off electricity and energize irrigation systems so that they don't get filled with flood water, the muddy water from the river. So there's a number of preparations that we take to get ready for the flood.
And that's some significant expense as well.
Yes, it does. We're getting it down pretty good because it seems like we get a flood about once every 7 or 8 years.
I was just going to say that the great record flood was it was 93, wasn't it? It's like 17 years ago. But even this year, it's like the 8th or 9th biggest ever. Yeah,
I think I've heard they were predicting it could be around the 7th highest flood. I think the highest flood was actually 1965. But they're saying this one's going to be a good one, and it's still to crest. It'll be cresting sometime this week.
And what happens in the cleanup after that? We let nature take its course to some extent, but there's a lot of human effort that also has to go into, I suppose, cleaning roads and other such things?
Cleaning roads, and one of the biggest issues we have, where we have some of the formal parks like Harriet Island, we have a great lawn there. It actually has a designation as a great lawn, and people look at it as a beautiful park to come down. And what happens after a flood is that it usually carries a fine amount of silt that actually falls on the turf. And when that dries out, that silt almost becomes like concrete. And it doesn't allow the grass to breathe and get the oxygen to the roots that it would like. So there's a lot of work in trying to clean up a lot of that silt. And in some cases, it might be such a thin layer, you can't physically remove it. So there's a lot of aeration and other turf work to try to restore oxygen and nutrients to the root systems.
Can you power wash it? I mean, is that kind of what's done?
Pretty hard to power wash a lot of turf, but there's a lot of power washing that goes on the other surfaces. For instance, the Harriet Island Pavilion will fill up with water, could be a foot or two, and it gets quite dirty, and so all it has to be power washed and sanitized.
Okay. Anything else with the floods that the public should know about?
The one issue that we're trying to discourage is people getting. We have a lot of people who are curious about the flood and naturally want to see it, and we're asking people to try to stay back. We do have some people down there, some security staff to try to keep people back because those waters rage and they're very dangerous, and naturally people want to get right up to the edge, and so if they see security staff trying to keep people back, we just ask the people to, watch it or look at it from a distance or from one of the bridges, but to try to stay back from the edge, and we don't want anyone to get hurt.
I went down to Hidden Falls yesterday just to get a look at how high the water had gotten, and it's basically covered almost the entire lowland down there. But when I got close enough to it, way in the distance I could see the current, and what was impressive was the speed. It was really fast, and you could see how that could be really dangerous, and almost regardless of what kind of craft you'd be in.
Yeah, that is for sure.
Okay. Tell me about the annual cycle. I mean, I noticed that the guys came around and trimmed the trees on my street in, about the second week of February, something like that?
Yeah, we try to trim trees. Ideally, you want to trim trees when the trees are dormant during the winter months. So ideally, we'd like to be out there trimming from about November to, sometime through March, and then we kind of let up on trimming. Unfortunately, our trimming cycle is not as much as we'd like it to be. It's right now it's at about 12, 13 years, when we'd like it to have more like 8 years. So sometimes our trimming gets into some of the months that we prefer not to trim, but we also try to trim trees that may be not susceptible. For instance, like oak wilt, you don't want to trim trees from the month, like from March to July, things like that. So we're out there. We trim about 11,000 trees a year, and so, but we're working at it.
Okay. How many trees are there just on boulevards?
On boulevards alone, there's about 150,000 boulevard trees.
That's a lot of work, yeah.
There's a lot of trees.
And when the staff is not trimming during that winter dormancy period, what do they do in the rest of the year?
Well, we remove about 2,000 trees that are either been diseased or die from age or whatever, or hazard trees. So we're removing those trees, about 2,000 a year. We have a planting season that we begin coming up shortly in May. It's our spring planting, and then we also do some in the fall. So we'll plant about 2,000 trees just for our normal maintenance. That doesn't count the EAB, or the emerald ash borer, I should say. We're also, any trees that we remove through that program have a separate planting program where we'll be trying to replace every ash tree that we remove.
Okay. We got about 2 minutes left. Is there anything that you would like to specifically direct people to about volunteering?
We have a website. It's www.stpaul.gov, and when you go onto that website, there's a number of links on there. If you go to government and then scroll down, and you get to eventually to Parks and Recreation. And for our section, there's one called Natural Resources, and I think it says Natural Resources Go Green. And so that would be the place to go to see any of the things we've talked about, whether it's our environmental services, our art and gardening, or our forestry. In addition, if people have questions about forestry other than things that are already on our website, and we have a lot of links for a lot of good information, including emerald ash borer, I'd recommend, if they're specifically about emerald ash borer, to go to the Minnesota Department of Agriculture, who has an excellent website with just a ton of information, all available at your fingertips.
Okay. And now May is a big month for volunteering, being Arbor Month. And then how about over the summer period? Parents maybe look at you like, can you occupy my kid for a few weeks? Are there programs like that?
We take just about any volunteers we can get. Any time of year, people can do cleanup, or they can do mulching trees, or they can remove invasive species. All that work we do all summer long. It's from May, even April, all the way through October. It's our busy season, and we get a lot of work accomplished, and a lot of it's done with volunteers. So
Wonderful.
We're looking for as many as we can get.
Well, Cy, you've been a font of information. Thank you very much for appearing with us.
Thank you, John.
I've been talking to Cy Kosell, Manager of Natural Resources for the City of St. Paul. We hope to see you next week on the St. Paul Forum.